Welcome to one of the most suppressed scientific disasters in American history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this documented account. We want to know what places and what times of day or night these stories reach around the world. In the summer of 1891, 12 scientists from various institutions across the United States embarked on an expedition to study Death Hollow Valley in northern Arizona Territory. They were geologists, botanists, anthropologists, the finest minds of their generation. They entered the valley on June 3rd with equipment, supplies, and ambitious research goals. 6 weeks later, only one man emerged. Dr. Jonathan Crane, the expedition's physician, was found wandering the desert 20 miles from the valley entrance, suffering from severe dehydration, malnutrition, and what doctors would later describe as complete psychological collapse. Dr. Crane never spoke a coherent word about what happened to his 11 colleagues. He spent the remaining 8 years of his life in an asylum, drawing the same symbols over and over on any surface available, symbols that matched nothing in any known language or scientific notation. The valley itself was declared a forbidden zone by the U.S. Geological Survey in 1892. Access was prohibited, the area was removed from public maps, and the fate of the 11 missing scientists became one of the most carefully guarded secrets in American scientific history. This is the story of the Death Hollow expedition, a scientific venture that discovered something that was never supposed to be found. A tragedy that authorities worked desperately to erase from record, and a valley that, to this day, remains off-limits to the public for reasons that have never been adequately explained. Death Hollow Valley is located in what is now the Arizona Strip, a remote region of northern Arizona between the Grand Canyon and the Utah border. In 1891, this was frontier territory, barely explored by American settlers, home to scattered Paiute and Navajo communities who had lived there for centuries. The valley itself was approximately 8 miles long and 2 miles wide at its widest point, surrounded by steep mesa walls that rose hundreds of feet on all sides. A seasonal creek ran through the valley floor, providing water during spring and early summer but drying to scattered pools by late summer. The valley had a reputation among the local indigenous populations. Multiple tribal groups independently referred to it as a place of avoidance. The Paiute called it Quiagatu Nakwa, which translates roughly as the valley where spirits are confused. The Navajo knew it as Che-Wuchibiko, meaning the valley of the empty wind. According to anthropological records collected in the 1880s, both groups told stories of people who had entered the valley and either never returned or came back fundamentally changed, unable to describe what they had experienced. These stories were known to some American settlers and explorers, but they were generally dismissed as primitive superstition. The scientific community of the late 19th century had little patience for indigenous knowledge, especially when it conflicted with the prevailing view that the American West was a wilderness waiting to be mapped, studied, and conquered by rational inquiry. The Death Hollow expedition was organized by the American Association for the Advancement of Science in early 1891. The impetus for the expedition came from preliminary surveys conducted by US Geological Survey teams in 1889 and 1890. These surveys had noted unusual geological formations in the Death Hollow area, including rock layers that appeared to be out of sequence, magnetic anomalies that caused compass readings to fluctuate wildly, and what survey reports described as unexplained acoustic phenomena, sounds with no apparent source that seemed to come from the valley walls themselves. These anomalies were scientifically intriguing. If properly studied, they might provide insights into geological processes, magnetic fields, and acoustic properties of rock formations. The association assembled a multidisciplinary team to conduct a comprehensive study of the valley during the summer of 1891. The expedition leader was Dr. Theodore Harrison, age 48, a geologist from Yale University who had conducted surveys throughout the American West and had published extensively on the geology of the Colorado Plateau. He was known for his meticulous methodology and his insistence on thorough documentation. The team also included Dr. Samuel Worthington, age 35, a geologist from the University of California, specializing in magnetic phenomena and unusual mineral formations. Dr. Marcus Webb, age 52, a botanist from Harvard University, interested in how plant life adapted to extreme environments. Dr. Jonathan Crane, age 29, a physician and naturalist from Philadelphia, serving as the expedition's medical officer and documenting any biological curiosities. Dr. William Patterson, age 41, an anthropologist from Columbia University, tasked with documenting any archaeological or cultural features in the valley. Dr. William Patterson. Also on the team were Dr. Charles Morrison, age 33, a physicist from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, specializing in acoustics and sound propagation. Dr. Robert Sullivan, age 38, a cartographer employed by the U.S. Geological Survey to create detailed maps of the valley. Dr. Henry Wallace, age 44, a chemist from Johns Hopkins University, responsible for analyzing soil, water, and rock samples. Dr. Thomas Fletcher, age 31, a surveyor and engineer responsible for establishing accurate elevation and distance measurements. The expedition also included 3 assistants: James Barrett, age 26, a graduate student in geology from Yale, serving as Dr. Harrison's assistant; Michael Chen, age 24, a graduate student in botany from Harvard, assisting Dr. Webb; and David Morrison, age 27, a photographer and artist responsible for visual documentation of the expedition. 12 men, all educated, all experienced in field research, all confident in the power of scientific inquiry to explain any natural phenomenon they might encounter. They were the product of an age that believed rational investigation could reveal all mysteries. They were about to discover how wrong that assumption could be. The expedition departed from Flagstaff, Arizona Territory, on May 27, 1891. They traveled north by wagon for 5 days, covering approximately 120 miles through increasingly remote terrain. They were accompanied by 2 Navajo guides who agreed to lead them to the valley entrance, but refused to enter the valley itself. According to the expedition journal kept by Dr. Harrison, preserved in the Yale University archives, the guides warned the scientists repeatedly about the valley, calling it a place where the world is thin, and suggesting that white men should not go there. Dr. Harrison recorded these warnings but dismissed them as superstition. He wrote on May 31st, "Our guides display remarkable reluctance to approach the valley, offering various reasons rooted in tribal mythology. While I respect their cultural beliefs, such concerns have no bearing on scientific investigation. We proceed with confidence that careful observation and measurement will reveal the natural explanations for whatever phenomena occur in this region." The expedition reached the valley entrance on June 2nd. The guides helped establish a base camp at the mouth of the valley, approximately half a mile from where the valley walls began to rise steeply. The camp consisted of 4 large tents, storage areas for equipment and supplies, and a corral for the pack animals. The plan was for the expedition to spend 4 to 6 weeks conducting their research, with the guides returning to resupply them at the 2-week mark, and again at the 4-week mark. On the morning of June 3rd, the expedition entered Death Hollow Valley. According to Dr. Harrison's journal, the last entry before the disaster, the team was in excellent spirits. The weather was clear and hot but tolerable. The valley appeared scientifically promising, with exposed rock layers showing clear stratification, unusual plant communities adapted to the extreme environment, and various features worthy of detailed study. The guides departed that same morning, heading back toward Flagstaff. They agreed to return on June 17th with additional supplies, This was the last contact the expedition had with the outside world while all 12 men were still accounted for. What happened during the following 6 weeks is known only through fragmentary evidence. Dr. Harrison's journal entries cease after June 3rd. No other journals from the expedition were ever recovered. The only account of what occurred comes from Dr. Jonathan Crane, and that account is so fragmentary and disturbed that it raises more questions than it answers. The first indication that something had gone wrong came on June 17th when the Navajo guides returned to the valley entrance with supplies. They found the base camp abandoned. Tents were still standing but showed signs of hasty departure. Equipment was scattered. Some supplies remained, suggesting the team had not planned to be gone long. Most disturbing, several personal items, including Dr. Harrison's journal and other notebooks, were found torn and partially burned in a fire pit. The guides, already uneasy about the valley, did not enter to search for the missing scientists. Instead, they returned to Flagstaff and reported the situation to the U.S. Geological Survey Office there. The survey office dispatched a search party on June 20th. This party consisted of 6 men, all experienced frontiersmen and surveyors, led by a USGS field agent named Thomas Crawford. Crawford's search party entered Death Hollow Valley on June 21st. They spent 3 days searching the valley floor and accessible areas of the surrounding mesas. They found no sign of the 12 scientists. What they did find was deeply disturbing. Approximately 2 miles into the valley, they discovered a campsite where the expedition had apparently spent several days. The site included rock samples carefully arranged for study, botanical specimens pressed and cataloged, surveying equipment set up for triangulation measurements. Everything was in order, showing no signs of any sudden emergency or attack. But there was something wrong with the site. Crawford noted in his report that all the equipment, all the papers, and all the specimens were arranged facing in one direction, toward the valley walls on the eastern side. More specifically, they were all oriented toward a particular section of the wall where the rock face showed unusual coloration, and what appeared to be regular patterns that might have been natural formations, or might have been something else. The search party examined this rock face closely. Crawford described it in his report as displaying geometric patterns that are difficult to photograph or sketch accurately. When viewed directly, they appear to shift or change depending on the angle of observation and the quality of light. Several members of my party reported feelings of disorientation and mild nausea when examining these formations for extended periods. Crawford made the decision to retreat from the valley after 3 days. In his report, filed with the USGS on June 27, 1891, he recommended a more extensive search with a larger team and better equipment. He also noted that his own men had become increasingly uneasy during their time in the valley, reporting strange sounds, particularly after dark, and a pervasive feeling of being watched. The USGS organized a second larger search party in early July. This party consisted of 15 men, including surveyors, a physician, and several armed guards in case the missing scientists had been victims of violence. They entered Death Hollow Valley on July 8th and conducted the most thorough search possible given the terrain and conditions. They found additional evidence of the expedition's presence, survey markers and cairns indicating that the scientists had indeed been conducting systematic measurements, more campsites at various locations throughout the valley, botanical collection sites where plant specimens had been gathered. But of the 12 men themselves, there was no trace, no bodies, no clothing, no signs of violence or catastrophe. It was as if 12 men had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The second search party also reported experiencing the strange phenomena Crawford had mentioned. Unusual sounds with no apparent source, compass readings that fluctuated without explanation, and most disturbing, several members of the party reported seeing figures at a distance, human-shaped, but moving in ways that did not seem quite right. When these figures were pursued or examined more closely, they were never found. They would simply be gone, leaving no tracks or any indication they had ever been there. After 10 days, the second search party retreated from the valley. The expedition leader, a surveyor named George Patterson, filed a report that was notably more cautious and unsettled than Crawford's had been. Patterson wrote, "I cannot provide a satisfactory explanation for the disappearance of the scientists. The valley displays numerous unusual characteristics that warrant further study. But I must note that the psychological effect of the environment on my men was significant. By the end of our search, several members of the party were experiencing symptoms of extreme anxiety and paranoia. For the safety of my team, I made the decision to withdraw. I do not recommend further expeditions into Death Hollow Valley unless proper precautions can be established." The disappearance of 12 prominent scientists created a sensation when news reached the eastern states in late July. Newspaper accounts varied from respectful obituaries to sensational speculation about what might have happened. Theories ranged from the scientists falling into hidden caves or being swept away by flash floods, to attacks by hostile Indians or wild animals, to increasingly wild speculation about supernatural causes. The families of the missing men demanded answers. Several were wealthy and influential, and they used their connections to pressure the government for a more extensive investigation. The American Association for the Advancement of Science called for a federal inquiry. By August 1891, there was significant public and political pressure to determine what had happened to the Death Hollow expedition. It was in this context that the sole survivor was discovered. On July 19, 1891, a rancher named William Garrett found a man wandering in the desert approximately 20 miles southeast of Death Hollow Valley. The man was in terrible condition, severely dehydrated, malnourished, his clothes torn and sun-damaged. He was barely conscious and unable to speak coherently. Garrett brought the man to the nearest settlement, a small town called Marble Canyon. The local doctor, a man named Samuel Mitchell, treated the patient for physical ailments and gradually brought him back from the edge of death. It took 3 days before the doctor could establish the man's identity. He was Dr. Jonathan Crane, the physician from the Death Hollow expedition. Dr. Crane had been missing for 6 weeks. He should have been dead from exposure and dehydration in the harsh desert environment. Yet somehow he had survived, wandering aimlessly until Garrett found him. But survival had come at a terrible cost. Dr. Crane was, in Dr. Mitchell's professional opinion, completely insane. Once Crane's identity was established, federal authorities were notified immediately. A U.S. Marshal arrived in Marble Canyon on July 25th to interview Crane and determine what had happened to the rest of the expedition. The Marshal, a man named Robert Thompson, spent 3 days attempting to question Crane. His report, filed in the National Archives, makes for disturbing reading. Crane was unable or unwilling to provide a coherent narrative. He spoke in fragments, often trailing off mid-sentence. He would become agitated without apparent cause, then fall silent for hours. When pressed for details about the expedition, he would either respond with nonsensical phrases or become violently distressed. The few statements Marshal Thompson was able to extract were cryptic and unhelpful. According to Thompson's report, Crane repeated certain phrases. They went through. We should not have looked at the patterns. The walls opened. Time moves differently there. Most disturbing was Crane's response when asked directly what happened to his colleagues. He looked at Thompson and said clearly, "They are still there. They will always be there. The valley keeps what enters." Thompson attempted to take Crane back to Death Hollow Valley, hoping that returning to the scene might trigger coherent memories. But when they approached within 5 miles of the valley entrance, Crane became completely uncontrollable. He fought against his restraints, screaming incoherently. The attempt was abandoned. Dr. Crane was transferred to the Territorial Asylum in Phoenix in early August 1891. The medical superintendent, Dr. Howard Wilson, diagnosed him with acute mania with delusions. Crane was placed in secure care and monitored continuously. Dr. Wilson kept detailed notes on his patient, notes that were later discovered in asylum archives in the 1950s. According to these notes, Crane never recovered his sanity. He spent his days drawing symbols on any surface available: the walls of his room, the floor, his own skin. The symbols were geometric patterns that Wilson described as resembling no known language or mathematical notation. Crane drew them obsessively. Always the same patterns repeated endlessly. Crane also spoke occasionally, though his words were rarely coherent. Wilson recorded fragments of these utterances. "The valley is not a valley. The rock remembers. They are between the layers now. Time folded. We opened what should stay closed. Patterns that move when you look away. The sound from inside the stone." Multiple doctors examined Crane, hoping to restore his sanity and learn what had happened to the expedition. All failed. Crane remained locked in his private nightmare, unable to communicate anything useful about the fate of his colleagues. He died on March 12, 1899, of pneumonia. He was 37 years old. His last words, recorded by an attending nurse, were, "Tell them not to go back. Tell them the valley is not empty." The disappearance of the Death Hollow expedition and the madness of its sole survivor created a problem for the scientific establishment and the federal government. 12 respected scientists had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The only survivor was insane and could provide no useful information. 2 search parties had entered the valley and experienced unusual phenomena that they could not adequately explain. Public pressure demanded answers that no one could provide. The solution was suppression. In September 1891, the U.S. Geological Survey issued a report on the Death Hollow expedition. The report concluded that the scientists had likely fallen victim to a combination of natural hazards. Flash flooding in the narrow valley could have swept them away. The extreme heat could have caused dehydration and disorientation. Hidden caves or sinkholes could have swallowed them. The report acknowledged that no bodies had been found, but suggested they might have been buried by rockfalls or washed downstream to locations outside the search area. This explanation satisfied no one who examined it critically. The scientists had been experienced field researchers, well-equipped and prepared for desert conditions. A flash flood severe enough to kill all 12 men would have left obvious evidence. No such evidence was found. Hidden caves might explain 1 or 2 disappearances, but not an entire expedition. And the report completely ignored the unusual phenomena that multiple search parties had reported. The strange sounds, the compass anomalies, the disorienting effects of the valley environment. But the official explanation served its purpose. It provided a narrative that could be cited by newspapers and discussed in public forums. It allowed the families of the missing men to hold funerals and memorialize their dead. It closed the case officially, even if it did not close it satisfactorily. What the official report did not mention was the action taken by the USGs in October 1891. Death Hollow Valley was declared a research reserve restricted area. Access was prohibited without specific authorization from the USGS director. The stated reason was to preserve geological and botanical features for future study. The real reason became clear when no research permits were ever issued. The valley was effectively closed. The area was removed from public distribution maps. When new editions of territorial maps were published, Death Hollow Valley was either omitted or marked vaguely as rough terrain without showing any details. Attempts by researchers to obtain permits to study the valley were denied without explanation. This might have been the end of the story, except that over the following decades, evidence continued to emerge suggesting that the Death Hollow expedition had discovered something that authorities wanted kept secret. In 1897, a geologist named Dr. Andrew Foster applied for a permit to conduct research in northern Arizona. His application specifically mentioned his interest in studying unusual rock formations in the Death Hollow area. His permit was denied. When he persisted, asking for reasons, he was told the area was closed for safety reasons. When he pointed out that the official report from 1891 had cleared the area as safe after the search parties found no specific hazards, he received no response. Foster, frustrated, decided to enter the valley without authorization. In June 1898, he and 2 assistants approached Death Hollow Valley from the north, avoiding the main entrance where they might be noticed. They spent 3 days in the valley, long enough for Foster to examine the rock formations that had interested him. According to Foster's private notes, discovered in his papers after his death in 1923, what he found in the valley disturbed him profoundly. He described geometric patterns in the rock face on the eastern wall, patterns that appeared to have been carved or formed with precision that seemed beyond natural geological processes. He attempted to photograph these patterns but found that the photographs did not capture them accurately. In the photographs, the patterns appeared as simple fractures or erosion patterns, but when viewed directly, Foster insisted, they were something more. Foster also described experiencing the phenomena that earlier observers had mentioned. Strange sounds with no apparent source. Severe disorientation when examining the rock patterns too closely. A pervasive feeling of wrongness that intensified the longer he remained in the valley. Most disturbing, Foster reported that on their final night in the valley, he and his assistant saw figures moving near the rock formations. Human-shaped but translucent, visible only in peripheral vision. When looked at directly, the figures would vanish. Foster and his assistants left the valley in haste. Foster initially planned to publish his findings, but shortly after his unauthorized visit, he was contacted by federal agents. He was informed that his entry into a restricted area was a federal crime, and that any attempt to publish information about Death Hollow Valley would result in prosecution. His notes and photographs were confiscated. He was required to sign a statement agreeing never to discuss his findings or return to the area. Foster complied but kept a private journal where he documented his experience. In this journal he wrote, "I do not know what the Death Hollow expedition discovered in that valley, but I believe they found something that challenges our understanding of geology, possibly of reality itself. The patterns on the rock face are not natural. They are too precise, too regular, and they affect the human mind in ways that I cannot explain scientifically. I understand now why the government wants the valley closed. Some discoveries are too dangerous to be made public." The early 20th century saw occasional attempts by researchers and adventurers to access Death Hollow Valley. All were rebuffed. The area was patrolled by federal agents, and anyone caught approaching was arrested for trespassing on federal land. Several people claimed to have seen the valley from a distance, noting that it appeared to shimmer or distort in ways that could not be explained by normal heat haze or atmospheric effects. In 1919, an anthropologist named Dr. Sarah Morrison became interested in the Death Hollow case while researching Paiute and Navajo oral traditions. She interviewed elderly tribal members who remembered the stories about the valley. What she learned suggested that the indigenous people's understanding of the valley was far more sophisticated than American authorities had credited. According to the accounts Dr. Morrison collected, the valley had always been a place of power and danger. Multiple indigenous groups had stories about it stretching back generations. The patterns on the rock face were said to be doorways or thin places where the boundary between this world and others could be crossed. The stories warned that looking at these patterns too long could trap a person between worlds, neither fully here nor fully there. Dr. Morrison attempted to publish her findings in an anthropological journal in 1921. Her paper was rejected without explanation by multiple journals. When she persisted, she was visited by federal agents who confiscated her research materials and warned her that continuing to investigate Death Hollow Valley would have serious consequences for her career. Morrison, intimidated, abandoned her research and moved to Europe, where she spent the rest of her career studying Mediterranean cultures. The 1930s and 1940s saw the area around Death Hollow Valley become increasingly restricted. During World War II, large portions of northern Arizona were designated as military restricted areas. After the war, these restrictions were maintained, ostensibly for various government purposes. Death Hollow Valley remained inaccessible. In 1952, during the height of the Cold War atomic testing era, rumors began to circulate that the valley was being used for secret government experiments. Some claimed they had seen unusual lights or heard strange sounds emanating from the valley at night. These rumors were never confirmed or denied officially, but they added another layer of mystery to the already enigmatic location. The 1960s brought new attention to Death Hollow from an unexpected source. The growing interest in UFOs and paranormal phenomena led some researchers to investigate the valley as a possible site of unusual activity. Several books about unexplained mysteries mentioned the Death Hollow expedition alongside other famous disappearances and strange occurrences. One researcher, a journalist named Frank Edwards, devoted a chapter of his 1966 book Strange World to the Death Hollow case. Edwards had obtained copies of some of the original documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. He presented a compelling case that the official explanation for the expedition's disappearance was inadequate, and that the government had actively suppressed information about what really happened in the valley. Edwards' book generated some public interest, but it was ultimately dismissed by mainstream media as sensationalism. The fact that Edwards included Death Hollow alongside more dubious cases like alien abductions and haunted houses made it easy for critics to dismiss his work as paranormal fantasy rather than serious investigation. In 1978, advances in satellite imaging technology made it possible to photograph even remote and restricted areas from space. Some of the early commercial satellite images included portions of northern Arizona, including the area where Death Hollow Valley was located. Researchers who examined these images noted unusual features. The valley appeared darker in the images than surrounding terrain, even accounting for shadow and vegetation. Some analysts noted what appeared to be regular geometric patterns visible on the eastern valley wall, though the resolution of the images was not sufficient to provide clear details. When these observations were published in a remote sensing journal, the images were quickly classified. The stated reason was that the area was part of a military reservation, and in releasing detailed imagery could compromise security. But researchers noted that no military facilities were actually located in that specific area, raising questions about the real reason for classification. The 1990s saw the growth of the internet and the emergence of online communities dedicated to investigating mysteries and unexplained phenomena. Death Hollow Valley became a topic of discussion in various forums. People shared what information they could find, pieced together the history of the 1891 expedition, and speculated about what might have happened. In 1997, a group calling themselves the Arizona Anomaly Research Team announced they would attempt to access Death Hollow Valley to investigate the mystery. They planned to approach the area covertly, document whatever they found, and publish their findings online before authorities could suppress them. The group never made their attempt. 2 days before their planned expedition, the leader of the group, a man named Richard Martinez, was visited by federal agents. He was shown classified documents that detailed the history of the valley and the various incidents that had occurred there. According to Martinez, interviewed years later, the documents confirmed that multiple people had vanished or been severely psychologically affected by exposure to the valley. The agents told him that entering the area would put his entire team at risk, and that if anyone died or went missing, he would be held criminally responsible. Martinez called off the expedition. He later stated that the agents had been professional but firm, and that their concern for his team's safety seemed genuine. not just bureaucratic. This encounter convinced Martinez that whatever was in Death Hollow Valley was real and dangerous, not just a government cover-up of an embarrassing historical incident. The most recent development in the Death Hollow case came in 2015. A team of scientists using ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies conducted a survey of unusual geological formations throughout the American Southwest. When they analyzed data from the Death Hollow area, they detected significant anomalies. The rock formations showed density variations that did not match normal geological patterns. There appeared to be void spaces within the rock at depths where caves should not exist, based on the surrounding geology. Most intriguing, the radar data showed what appeared to be highly regular geometric patterns within the rock structure of the eastern valley wall. These patterns were too precise and too extensive to be natural. They suggested either ancient construction embedded in the rock or some form of crystalline structure that had no explanation in conventional geology. The team attempted to publish their findings but were contacted by the Department of the Interior before publication could proceed. They were told that the data regarding Death Hollow Valley was subject to restrictions. They were asked to remove any specific references to the valley and to describe their findings only in general terms without location details. The lead researcher on the project, speaking anonymously to a science journalist in 2017, expressed frustration. "We found something in that valley that shouldn't be there according to everything we know about geology. The patterns are artificial or the result of processes we don't understand. Either possibility is scientifically significant, but we're not allowed to study it. We're not allowed to publish our data. We're essentially being told that this discovery doesn't exist. It's scientific censorship, plain and simple. So where does this leave us more than 130 years after 12 scientists entered Death Hollow Valley? We know that they vanished without trace despite extensive searches. We know that the sole survivor went completely insane and spent the rest of his life drawing inexplicable symbols. We know that multiple subsequent visitors to the valley reported unusual phenomena, geometric patterns in rock, strange sounds, psychological effects. We know that the government has maintained strict control over the valley for over a century, preventing any scientific study or public access. The official explanation that the scientists fell victim to natural hazards is clearly inadequate. The pattern of suppression and control that has characterized every aspect of this case for more than a century suggests that something was discovered in Death Hollow Valley that authorities deemed too dangerous or too disturbing to reveal to the public. What could that discovery have been? The evidence points to something related to the geometric patterns in the rock face on the eastern valley wall. Multiple observers across different time periods have noted these patterns. Dr. Foster described them as too precise to be natural. The sole survivor, Dr. Crane, obsessively drew similar patterns during his years in the asylum. Modern remote sensing has detected regular geometric structures within the rock itself. Indigenous peoples who lived in the region for centuries before American settlement consistently described the valley as a thin place, a location where the boundary between worlds could be crossed. They warned that the patterns on the rock face were doorways that should not be opened. They told stories of people who looked at the patterns too long and became lost between realities. Could there be truth to these stories? Could the Death Hollow expedition have discovered something that challenges our understanding of reality itself? The evidence suggests they found something that drove Dr. Crane insane. Something that made 11 scientists vanish completely. Something that has led the government to maintain a cover-up for over a century. The patterns themselves seem to be the key. Multiple witnesses describe them as difficult to photograph, as appearing to shift when viewed from different angles, as causing disorientation and psychological effects when examined too closely. These characteristics suggest the patterns are not simply carved rock, but something more complex. Perhaps they interact with human perception in ways we don't understand. Perhaps they represent some form of technology or natural phenomenon beyond our current scientific knowledge. Whatever they are, the government has decided they are too dangerous to study and too important to ignore. Death Hollow Valley remains closed and monitored. Satellite imagery remains classified. Anyone who gets too close is warned off or arrested. The message is clear. What happened in 1891 must not be repeated. 12 scientists entered Death Hollow Valley in 1891 with the confidence that rational inquiry could explain any mystery. 11 of them never returned. The 12th returned broken, unable to articulate what he had witnessed, able only to draw symbols that matched the patterns on the valley walls. Symbols that suggested a door had been opened, a door that perhaps should have remained closed forever. Dr. Theodore Harrison, Dr. Samuel Worthington, Dr. Marcus Webb, Dr. William Patterson, Dr. Charles Morrison, Dr. Robert Sullivan, Dr. Henry Wallace, Dr. Thomas Fletcher, James Barrett, Michael Chen, and David Morrison. 11 men who sought to expand human knowledge and instead encountered something that human minds were not meant to comprehend. 11 men who are still listed as missing, though everyone knows they are dead, or worse than dead. Trapped, as Dr. Crane suggested, in the valley that keeps what enters. The forbidden zone remains forbidden. The official explanation remains inadequate. The truth remains buried beneath layers of classification and denial. And somewhere in that remote valley in northern Arizona, geometric patterns continue to mark the rock face, visible to anyone who dares to look, waiting for the next person foolish enough to stare too long and try to understand what they mean. 12 scientists went to study the valley in 1891. Only one made it out. The forbidden zone is exposed, but the deepest secrets remain locked behind government restrictions and the psychological barriers that drove Dr. Crane mad. What they found in that valley changed everything, and that change was so profound, so dangerous, that more than a century later, the government still works to ensure that no one can follow in their footsteps and make the same discovery again. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess. Some places are too perilous to explore. Some doors once opened cannot be closed. The Death Hollow expedition learned these truths the hardest way possible, and their fate stands as a warning that echoes across generations. There are mysteries in this world that are better left unsolved, places that should remain forbidden, and patterns that should never be examined too closely. The valley waits still, the patterns remain, and somewhere in the space between solid rock and empty air, perhaps 11 scientists exist still, trapped by what they discovered, unable to return, unable to warn others away. Death Hollow keeps what enters. The indigenous peoples knew this for centuries. Now we know it too, but unlike them, we have forgotten how to heed warnings. And that forgetting may be the most dangerous thing of all.